What led me to farm? That's the question. Well, two things really. A fortunate circumstance and my own search for good food. My accountant suggested an investment property in Australia's southwest as an effective financial strategy. But as I searched through the coastal towns, looking at 200 square metre blocks of land, it was pretty uninspiring. It became clear to me that I was looking for something other than a suburb in the country. And when I saw Southampton Homestead in the real estate section of one of the local papers, I was compelled to drive there immediately. First thing I saw were two Georgian Victorian buildings, built by First Fleet colonists in 1855. Set on the banks of the Blackwood River, amid 120 acres of fertile river valley, and surrounded by majestic 150-year-old English oak trees. But when I looked beyond the homestead gardens to the surrounding environment, it was pretty bad. The pastures had been planted out with pine plantations some 40 years earlier and cleared a month before I arrived. They were under metres of pine debris. Likewise, when I looked at the riparian zones, which is the 5 waterways running through our valley, they were completely choked in French blackberry, many metres high. No machine contractors would go in there for fear of damage. At the time, I'd watched an amazing documentary on an Australian story called Back from the Brink. In this episode, it describes the life and work of grazer and champion horse breeder Peter Andrews and his work on his unique understanding of the Australian landscape. He has written and spoken extensively on the movement of water, fertility, and the succession of weed varieties and botanical plants in the regeneration of ecosystems. Well, not knowing whether or not I could succeed at Southampton, I decided to give it a go. For the first 6 months, nothing would grow in the acidic soil. Then, soil that had been under a blanket of pine needles for over 40 years. Then, the blackberry came, waves of it. Burn it, they said. I did not. Poison it, they said. Well, I didn't do that either. Instead, I turned to biology and I composted and mulched its ass. The next year came the Scottish thistles, metres high. They shared the same fate as the blackberry. But by the third year, the grasses and the clovers started to reappear. And the fourth year, as you can see in the photo, I had a fellow farmer say to me, "Jeffrey, it's time to make a choice. It's time to make a decision." And that was my next epiphany. You see, what I'd come to realise, and what he taught me, was that the importance in the regeneration of ecosystems, the importance of animal impact. And what does that mean? Well, it means it was time to quit my job in the city. It was time to move to the farm. It was time to go full-time on the land. I eagerly soaked up the work of ecologist Alan Savory, now renowned for his own TED talk on reversing the deserts. You see, grasses are a relatively new arrival in the scheme of things, having only appeared after the disappearance of the dinosaurs. It seems that they evolved in response to the grazing pressure of enormous herds of megafauna on every continent, including this one. They're mostly gone now. The mastodons, the mammoths of Asia, the bison, elk of North America, the giant kangaroos, and the diprotodons of Australia, 2.7 tonne. These enormous herds of enormous animals were kept moving across the landscape in search of food. Why? Well, can you imagine 1 million people pooping on your dinner? You keep moving as well. Told you the manure was going to be in there. Then they were kept tight by the pressure of predators on their perimeter in a massive herd, and then they would be gone. And the birds and the fowl would arrive to dine on the bug festival, busy digesting the passage of the herbivores. And then the grasses and soils would get to recover. Each grazing cycle would fix more carbon into the soil And it's this bounty, this biological capital that we have been busy squandering as a civilization ever since the industrialisation of farming, not realising we were spending more carbon than we were earning. So, not knowing whether or not I could succeed, I decided to introduce my herds to my pastures for the first time in 50 years. Well, things were going so well. I was building soil. New grass species were arriving as the changing soil conditions invited them to do so. Things were going so well. It's an all too common story these days in Western Australia. On the February 13th, 2013, as there often is, there was a week of temperatures in the low 40s. On this particular day, there was a dry lightning storm, releasing some 66 strikes across the mid-southwest of WA. One of those lightning strikes was 1 kilometre from our valley. The fire quickly spread down to the rivers, and just like a wick, it slowly entrenched its position in the vegetation. And then it reached a critical point in its development. The smoke column pushed through into the stratosphere, and now the fire was making its own weather. Winds sprung up 100 kilometres an hour and pushed a 20-metre high flame front through our valley, trapping many of our friends and neighbours trying to defend our homes. It was apocalyptic and devastating. It completely destroyed our pastures, the beautiful old buildings, my home, and wiped out all of our animals. Talk about empathy. Try and imagine that. When you wake up the next morning after an event like that, I remember realising it was all gone. My grandmother's paintings, my library, everything I'd ever read or written, family heritage, photographs, things collected from over half a lifetime of work, travel, adventure. I remember lying there and realising things that change your life. That now all that I had left to do my life's work wasn't actually in the building, wasn't in the house. It was actually in here, and in here. And powerfully, once you realise that, it can't be taken away by fire. A sense of purpose is indestructible. Friends showed up with seed, machinery, expertise. We picked up rocks and stumps, we pushed away fallen debris. We spent a couple of days finding and burying all the animals. But, as it always does, the rains came. And as we regreened the fields, so too we regenerated my heart. That's a hell of a bit of background. But what have we been doing since 2013? That's the real question. Well, I've been thinking a lot about farming and why so much of that system seems to be toxic or in decline. After the fire, I had some seeds of a few ideas, plus some proven ones as well, about how could I farm differently, and in 3 key ways. Firstly, we've just been awarded the National Landcare Prize for Innovation in Sustainable Farming for our work in regenerating the landscape not once, but twice. Secondly, and I call this bringing all the food production back onto the farm, and I'm going to explain more in a moment. And thirdly, how could we protect our valley unit? How could we make our life's work last? How could we protect our valley unit's ecosystem for perpetuity, beyond a human lifetime, say for 500 years? So, to the first point. How do we actually farm? This is a quote from the Polyfaces documentary, and one of my favourite authors, Michael Pollan. The idea that we could take beautiful food off the land and heal it at the same time is a very hopeful lesson. And it suggests that, while the sun still shines, there is a free lunch. And we can capture that energy and run it through a system and not diminish the world. Well, at Southampton Homestead, we pasture-raised poultry as our main economic crop. But we do it holistically according to Savory's principles and practically after farming heroes of ours, Joel Salatin and his family from Polyface Farm in Virginia. How? Well, not having any diprotodons handy, we use cows to provide the ecological services that our soils and our grasses need. I mean, we've all been hearing a lot about microbes, right? Gut microbes recently. And that's been reflected in our words that weren't part of our vernacular only a few years ago. Kombucha, kimchi, sauerkraut, right? Well, cows are really just big grass fermenters, pooping out sauerkraut and probiotics all over the grass. It's really fantastic stuff. Our formula: herds of megafauna, followed by birds, followed by recovery of the grasses and soils. Each grazing cycle fixes more carbon. That's what we do. We move cows, we follow with chickens, we take CO2 out of the atmosphere. This picture shows this, portable shelters we call chicken tractors that house our baby birds. Every single day we move every one of those shelters onto a fresh piece of pasture. And you only have to count back the number of days to see how quickly the pasture recovers. Now the interesting thing is, as one of my teachers said to me, there are no new fundamentals, right? This picture is from a very old book about farming called The Farming Ladder. Check the date. 1943, what are you looking at there? Mobile chicken shelters surrounded by grazing livestock. We don't claim to be innovative. Hell, we even ripped off a 4 billion year old idea called biology. Sunlight into food and leave the world a better place. It's kind of a cool concept, don't you think? This is how 99% of the chicken is grown here in Australia today. This won't build soil. What this does do is bring pollution and breed disease and despair in the animals and the people who are involved in these systems. This is how we farm. This is our farm. This builds soil. This brings biodiversity. This takes carbon and puts it out of the atmosphere and puts it into the ground. And the shocking part, we're one of the few farms in Australia actually doing this. Anyway, as Michael Pollan says as well, when chickens, or the interesting part, when chickens get to live like chickens, they taste like chicken too. So on to the next point. What do we do on the farm? Well, everything, the whole supply chain. Our Somalad heritage chickens, they roam out on the pasture, laying fertilised eggs in a mobile shelter we call an engobile. We gather up the eggs, we incubate them, we hatch and brood the baby chicks, and then we grow them out on the pasture for about 10 to 14 weeks. They live under the sun, the wind, the rain. They sleep by the moon and the stars. They spend their days dining on insects and grazing on our saddle bale pasture. Joel Salatin has a saying, our chickens have a really good life and one bad day. Think about it. It's not really a bad day, but it's about higher purpose. And one morning, we go out and we gather them up, and we bring them to a small room, which is like a commercial kitchen, really. And once there, normally in batches of 100, we thank each bird and we take its life. Its spirit, well, its spirit goes wherever it goes. But the body stays behind for the tribe, for our families, for our communities, as beautiful food. And the shocking part, we're one of the few farms in Australia where the entire supply chain of food production occurs on the farm. We hatch, grow, harvest, and sell directly to our customers through farmers markets and social media. This is in direct contrast to the current economic model of corporate intensive commodity-based agriculture, which is continuing to have such a dramatic and devastating effect on farming families, on their prosperity, and on the landscapes around the world. We have won back the terms of trade onto the farm. Lastly, I wanted to share with you a little bit about our mission. Obviously, as you can see, to grow food and to grow farmers and to repair the landscape at the same time. As far as future plans, they're in the works, but over the next few years we plan to transition our farm and transition our business to become the first food-producing not-for-profit farm institute in Australia. We are building a farm and its ecosystem for perpetuity. We're creating a founding vision, a succession plan to guide those who follow, people, environment, business, landscape. We're doing it to last longer than a human lifetime. And importantly, we're doing it with different economic drivers to the current model of profit only and its consequences. So, in closing, mostly we've never met, but I'm the guy who gets affected every time one of you eats a meal. And every time you shop for food, affects our valley, affects my rivers, affects my soil. But it's actually your rivers, it's your soil, it's your valley. This is a choice that you're making about the kinds of farms and farmers that we'll be having in the future. And it's something that you all can do. And as a farmer, I'm going to trust that you choose life. Thank you.